Hello and welcome to this, the seventh in our series of P2 webinars, and it should be a really exciting one today, I'm hoping, because essentially what we'll be looking at today is how one reboots one's portfolio after the chaos of the last few months. For those who've joined these webinars before, you'll be fully aware that we take about 30 minutes. We will be answering questions, but afterwards, so do feel free to email questions in. We will, of course, be sending you an email of the webinar afterwards. And equally, we'll be talking you through a reboot checklist a bit later on. So if you'd like a copy of that, please drop us an email off the back of that. So without further ado, let's look at why this is so very challenging. I really like this definition. For those who are not familiar with the Urban Dictionary, it's a wonderful little tool. It defines a reboot as how you start anew with fresh ideas in a way that is consistent with the principles of the original, but not unnecessarily constrained by what has taken place before. When COVID hit all those months ago, everybody's portfolio was upended. Strategies changed, staff went onto furlough, contractors were let go, and lots of projects were mothballed. Now we need to think about how we start all that anew, and how we do that in a world where strategies have to have changed, they absolutely have to have done. How we do that in a world where the change in the customer landscape will almost certainly have changed. And we need to do that with three really key goals in mind. We need to do that in a way that gets people productive from day one. And I'm sure we've all been through the experience of starting up projects and having them be fairly chaotic. Imagine that scaled across the entire portfolio. It'll be incredibly easy to lose 30, even 60 days without delivery in the chaos that could ensue. And even in a medium-sized organization, that's £1 million down the drain. We need to do it in a way that picks the right projects for our new strategy. And there will be a new strategy. There has to be a new strategy. If we continue with the same old projects, we'll be wasting money, we'll be wasting time. And we have to do it in a way that re-engages the teams. We're going to make an awful lot, we're going to talk an awful lot about resources over the next half hour and just how critical they are. You have to have the right resources, but if you have the right resources, you have to find a way to make sure they're engaged, they're motivated, and they know what they're doing so they can be productive from day one. Make no mistake, this is the preeminent challenge that the transformational community is going to face, probably in this decade. In the next 2 or 3 years' time, we will look back at this and see the organizations who aced this test, and those ones will be the ones who are thriving, and the ones that don't, well, brutally honest, they probably won't be here. So it's really important that we think about this, we engage well with it, because it really is going to be a litmus test of our organization's transformational strength and resilience. It's one that's absolutely critical that we don't fail. So that's what we're going to be exploring. Yes, Kate.
Adam, I'm just interrupting because I don't know that you're showing the current screen. Can you?
Oh, I do apologise. Let me just have a.
I think it's probably worth just reiterating the definition there. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
No, I apologise. Is that coming through clear now?
It is, yes.
Wonderful. So as I say, the really important definition: to start anew with fresh ideas in a way that's consistent with the principles of the original, but not unnecessarily constrained by what has taken place before. So critically, next 3 months, absolutely critical, and we mustn't fail this test. So that's what we're going to be exploring over the next half hour or so. For those who aren't familiar with P2, just as a quick reminder, we are the transformational challenger consultancy that was set up about 7 years ago to offer a real alternative to the big four, and we do that by consistently delivering on our P2 promises. That's to improve, control, and deliver on our clients' ambitions. I'm Adam Skinner, I'm Director of Consulting here, and you just heard Kate, but she'll introduce herself properly in a few minutes' time. So, for those of you who joined us at the last session, the Project Mothball webinar, you'll be very familiar with this. This is P2's crisis recovery roadmap. COVID clearly isn't the first crisis that organizations have to recover from, and we've used this a number of times quite successfully. What it essentially does is lays out the key steps that an organization goes through when it hits a crisis. So it's been disrupted or an organizational change has to happen. It's fairly straightforward. Stage 1, you're in BAU, you hit a crisis point, you go through crisis response, you go into a lower level hibernation phase, you hit recovery point, you recovery reboot, and then you're out in a clear recovery environment. The Project Mothball webinar focused on those first 3 stages, BAU, response, and hibernation. Today, we're going to be focusing on the final stage of that, recovery point, recovery reboot, and how you get successfully into a recovery stage. That Mothball webinar is available on the P2 website for those who want to investigate it. So, how do we do these things? Well, this is probably the most important slide in this deck, because this slide allows us to share what a good and a bad reboot feel like. It really helps create that burning bridge over what needs to happen over the next few months. At the top, you'll see what should be happening, really. What should be happening is we should be hitting a recovery point. We should be having a clear decision around that recovery point, and then we should be coordinating a sensible ramp up of our projects into that recovery stage. Where this goes wrong, really goes wrong in 2 ways. You either have a decision paralysis challenge, where actually when you should be recovering, when we should be starting to reboot, people can't make decisions. They can't make decisions on what projects to deliver. They can't make decisions on what strategy to implement. And the organizations use a month, for 2 months, 3 months, trying to stand themselves up when they don't really know the direction they're going in. That's clearly a really bad place to be in. You know, if we lose 2 or 3 months at this point, that's 2020 gone as a transformational year. The flip side of that is there is something that we call decision overload. And decision overload is basically where we hit a recovery point and people just say, go, 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 and you try and stand up all your projects in one go. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone on this call knows what a disaster that tends to be, but you'd be surprised how often it occurs, because what you end up trying to do is rush resources on, you get a tangle of methodologies being established, and a huge amount of effort goes into delivering very, very little. And that's the red line, or what we call the unhappy path to delivery. So what you need to really be trying to avoid is a situation whereby there's very little thought and we charge into standing up all our projects. What one really easy example we give is actually the simple example of logistics. You imagine you stand up 10 projects, 10 people on each project, 100 people trying to stand up over a period of a few days, all trying to get logins, all trying to get laptops. It goes without saying that that is an absolute disaster, and you can very quickly lose a lot of time in that delivery. Now, the happy path looks something like this, because what you're essentially trying to do is ensure that you spend a chunk of time, a chunk of effort, a chunk of hassle, as we say here, developing the approach you want to do to that recovery. So as soon as you hit that recovery point, you will see an increase in effort as you try and coordinate that reboot and the standing up of your projects. But actually, once you get over that hump, you should see the castle levels dropping down to a sustainable and steady point as the projects start to deliver. So really important to avoid that chaotic implementation that just sees a massive ramp up in hassle, and really important to spend a little bit of time upfront coordinating your approach so that you can then deliver successfully at a sustainable level. So that's what we're trying to achieve here. Of course, the kickoff for that is what we call that recovery point. The recovery point is that point where you say, right, we're going to start going for this. It's now time to start rebooting our portfolio. And deciding when that point is far more art than science. So there's no simple algorithm that can do this. You know, there'll be a range of external factors and a range of internal factors. External factors like, you know, customers will be starting to demand changes in products. The wider environment will start to allow people to come into stores and spend money. And internal factors such as you'll have started to accrue significant service debt from projects you've stopped to try and improve the internal operations, or staff may need to come back off furlough to maintain them with the organization. So all these factors may be coming together to create a point where you're saying it's time to go. Probably my top two recommendations here would be, firstly, it's all about communication. It's about communication between the business teams and the change teams to decide when both feel is the right time to go. And secondly, there's probably something really important here about being able to articulate your strategy in this new world. Because if you can clearly articulate your strategy, if you can clearly say, well, what's the benefit of doing stuff and where the value should come from, then it's almost certainly time to start doing that. If you're still in a bit of a fog, if you aren't quite sure the direction to go, it's maybe not time to go though, or it's maybe time to really start thinking heavily about that strategy. But as I say, strategy, understanding where that transformation now needs to take the organization is hugely important, both as a flag of the recovery point and in terms of deciding what you're going to do when you optimize your portfolio. So that's the recovery point. I'll now hand over to Kate, who's going to talk in a little bit more detail about what needs to occur during the reboot and during recovery.
Thanks, Adam, and hi, everyone. I'm going to really talk through this roadmap. We're calling it the Road to Recovery. As we move out of hibernation, we're going to have a decision to go live, as Adam outlined. And there needs to be a brief prioritization or optimization exercise over the portfolio to confirm the new priority projects for the reboot. Next, we're recommending some activity that takes place at the portfolio level, and we're going to call this portfolio reboot. This is all about establishing the resourcing for these projects, communicating to the project community, making sure suppliers are around to support the initiatives as they reboot, and planning the early activity that's going to take place as projects come online. The output of this phase is a reboot plan, and we've got a couple of recommendations on that. Firstly, we're going to recommend that the projects are organised in a series of waves that run concurrently but follow a consistent pattern, and we'll describe how we go about setting up these waves. Secondly, we're recommending that we don't bring everyone back at once. As Adam described, it could lead to a chaotic situation as everyone comes and tries to get going at once. So we'll walk through what the advanced party looks like and how you bring those people on board to start delivering. After the portfolio reboot, we dive down into the individual projects and do more of a reboot of the projects themselves. And the output of this is really a reboot checklist where we've completed all the exercises that we need to go ahead. And I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into a couple of excerpts from that reboot checklist as we go forward. We've mapped this all across to a T- and T+ plan. The indicative timeline here shows around 6 to 7 weeks. This will completely depend on the complexity of your portfolio and the status of your resource pool. You may well be able to condense this, but we think that the portfolio reboot and project reboot timelines are approximately equal. You'll need to manage business expectations of when the project will finally deliver, because you'll need to add the time it took to mothball projects, the length of time you've been in hibernation, and the reboot recovery timescale to enable you to give an idea of when projects will actually deliver. So let's start with the portfolio reboot phase. And Adam, if you could switch to the next slide. During this phase, we come up with a reboot plan which shows when, what, and how we're going to remobilise. As we say, we're recommending you do this in a phased approach so you can learn the lessons from one phase into another. Firstly, we need to allocate projects to waves, and then we need to do some really detailed resource planning and allocation to make sure we've got the right people on assignments on all the projects, and we're calling that flattening the curve. There'll obviously be some pre-work, and as I said, we need to learn the lessons from one phase to the next. So moving on to the next slide, we are looking at what projects we're going to put into which of the waves. Essentially, this is a really good time to consider some of those projects which you may have mothballed with the full intention of rebooting, but now things have changed so much that you can't see that the value is there from rebooting them. So be brave at this point and put a stop to them. In addition, you might then allocate your projects according to their criticality and their resource availability. So firstly, in wave one, let's put in all the business critical initiatives that can deliver some value early and can support the new priorities. And perhaps you've got all the resources still in-house, and at least that forward party around, most of those forward party are available to make them happen. So for slower waves, you might consider those that are less mission critical, and the value can be staggered in those. And you may not have such a clear path for where all the resources are for the rest of the team. The final example is where you might have a reshape or redesign of initiatives. A great example of this is you might have something that was perhaps a Christmas related initiative, and unless it delivers by October, you may not get the value that you need. But you could go through a reshape of this initiative and at least get some value by setting up a project to deliver some elements. So we did talk about this in our adaptive delivery webinar, which is still available on the website. So once we've got an idea of the overall allocation to different waves, we need to do some more detailed resource planning. We need to establish who is in the forward party. And on the top right hand side, we've got some ideas of who you might get into this concentrated team. It's not the whole team, it's 2 or 3 individuals who can unwrap the mothballed project and set it up and set the scene for the rest of the team. And depending on what stage you are with the project, it's likely to involve different people. So you're likely to need some project leadership, whatever the stage is. If it's in delivery or in the early stages, then sponsors will be key at this stage. And you might have architects and analysts important at the early stages. You're not likely to bring in all your developers and other people at this stage, but there might be some assurance people you need if you're just about to go into the testing phases. If you're on an agile project, you may well have the product owner, scrum master, perhaps the lead developer form this forward party. So the key point is that it's just a small assembled bunch of people who can stand up the rest of the project and set up the resource plan for everyone else. The other part of this flattening the curve is really to look at capacity planning across your resource overall pool. People may have been furloughed, people may have been accelerated onto different projects, and we need to make sure that the wave pattern doesn't break the cycle, and we need to bring down the resource pool, the resource curve, so that it can be manageable. So you need to allocate both the forward party and the individual resources to the teams and have a good idea of how you're going to go about this. It's important to consider you may have strategic suppliers and can help to provide some burst capacity at this point, but you're really going to be reconfirming the wave pattern as you go through this exercise. To move on, Adam, please. I'm now going to talk through how this relates to a T- and T+ plan around bringing that forward party in. So we've got a timeline here of a few weeks, and here you can see that in the first couple of weeks, what you're going to be doing is flattening the curve and that reboot planning, and really setting up the communications, because until you work out what you're going to do in your plan, you won't know what to tell people. We're recommending you have a check-in point at the middle of this period of portfolio reboot, where you check in on your reboot plan, your comms plan. You may have portfolio actions and issues that need to be considered, and you might have a good idea of the cost of the different waves. So this is a good point to bring in your governance forums to check on how the portfolio will be rebooted. Assuming you get the go-ahead, then you can move forward. Perhaps if you don't get the go-ahead, you might reserve that project for a future wave. But in the final weeks, what we'll be doing is really checking in on and setting up the plans for week 1 for the forward party. So consider all the logistics that you need to do in setting up accesses and making sure that everyone will know what they're doing and has a good plan of action when they come in a consistent way. And finally, Adam, if you we'll have some checklists that are ready to go, and with the forward party assembled, you can conduct introductions, town halls, start to get the rhythm of the project set up. And all those forward parties are issued with their checklist and plans so that they can get to work immediately. So this is at the portfolio level in order to bring in the forward party. At the project level, we move forward to, again, a 2 or 3 week timeline. And on this, we will bring the forward party in, and the first part of that exercise is for them to unwrap the project and go through their action plan, update key elements of the standard project artifacts, particularly focusing on the stakeholder map and resource plan, check in on what's happened while projects have been hibernating, and then set forward the plan going forward. It's good at this point to also have another checkpoint, which will be around the T+2 period. And at this, you'll really get the go-ahead from the governance as to this project can go forward, or perhaps we need to delay it while we sort out some resourcing situations. And then, assuming you get the go-ahead, you'll then need to do the same for the rest of the project team. We're recommending you run a reboot workshop where you will just make sure that all parties know what they're doing. Remember, you might have some resourcing changes at this point. It's not necessarily the same team that are on board, but you'll use this week to set up the logistics, engage with all the sponsors and stakeholders and suppliers, and make sure that everyone's on board for the final return. So at this point, we're ready to continue against a modified plan. So again, make sure that communication is important. We'll operate daily stand-ups for the communities and the team members, and everyone will know what they're doing. So this is a way, it's really important to know that it's a stressful period as people are returning to work, and it's really useful for them to have a plan of action so that they can get to work quickly and effectively. So the portfolio will support throughout this, and they'll also be planning the future waves. So Adam, if you want to flip to the next slide, I'm going to give a quick talk through of a few elements of the rebooting checklist. We've mentioned it a number of times, and for those of you that joined us on the mothballing webinar, we talked through how you could mothball projects in a really effective and consistent way. And we're reversing this activity, if you like. So we have that checklist. Please reach out and we can provide you with a copy. It's divided into about 5 areas of delivery, finances, governance and control, information, and people and resources. It has around 50 lines in it. So I've just shown a couple here around governance and control and people and resourcing. It has the usual RAG statuses and other things, so that if you're rebooting a number of different projects at the same time, you can look at them and see how mature their rebooting is through that process. So it's really good to standardize the way you do things and make sure everyone isn't coming in with a proliferation of new processes and new ways of rebooting and new products that they're producing. If you do it in a standard way, it's much easier to get to the value quicker. So one more thing before I pass back to Adam is what might we do if perhaps there's been a lot of change in the communities that deliver your projects, and the forward team resource may not be available. So we'd like to kind of talk through the opportunity of tiger teams. They could be called red teams or anything else that kind of suits the organisation. But really this is a team of experienced delivery people that can provide hypercare and project teams, particularly where there's been quite a lot of resource changes. It's a cross-functional team of experts that can plan, mobilise and launch projects. You've probably got some delivery people, maybe a couple of architects in there, and it can be used on all or a selection of projects. And the real aim of these tiger teams is to stand up these projects in a consistent manner that's going to help everyone to understand and deliver it effectively. So what that will look like, there'll be a couple of weeks planning what those teams look like, who's in them, and scheduling the projects against them, then bringing those teams together and those guys working together to understand what they're doing and you know, form a proper program. And then we've got a couple of waves illustrated here. They will review the first project and then reboot it, and then take on the second project. All the time, portfolios giving some support along the way. So if we move on, Adam, I'm just reiterating where what I've covered at the moment. We've covered the portfolio reboot stage and the production of the reboot plan and the project reboot and the use of the reboot checklist. I'm now going to hand back to you, Adam, to kind of give some description of how we keep the health of the reboot in progress.
Yes, thanks very much, Kate, because of course the health is absolutely critical here. You will not have experienced stress into your change portfolio like this before. So when we talk about health, we of course mean both the program health and the health of one's individuals, and we just recommend 3 top tips for managing this. I mean, the first and probably the most important is you need to treat this like a project. There's no getting away from that. It needs to be treated like a project with key achievements and daily stand-ups to track progress against those key achievements. It's about getting that forward party up and running. It's about making sure you've got at least 80% of your resources in place. Go, no go is a really sensible thing to do, and we'd really strongly recommend a reboot workshop so everybody is aligned. So treat it like a project. If you are treating it like a project, you need to understand that things are going to go wrong, and there's a really important need to learn lessons and develop your approach, particularly if you're taking a sensible wave rollout. Each wave needs to learn from the previous one. Each wave needs to get better and more effective. So do those retrospectives, develop as you go. And finally, and of course this is most appropriate given it is Mental Health Awareness Week, there's no getting away from the fact that when we talk about resource, the most important resource is the people. That's what drives change, and you can have the best BA in the world, the best PM in the world. If they aren't engaged, if they're feeling overly stressed, you're going to lose a massive amount of value. Keep those people connected, keep them feeling valued, keep them coordinated so they know what they need to do and where they need to go for help. And anyone who's listened to any of these other webinars know how much I push this final point. It is simply about communication. Help people know where they are and where they need to go. So as we come to the closing few minutes, allow me to just turn to P2 and ways that we can support in what is a monumental challenge for all organizations. There's really 3 things we'd like to suggest that we can help with. I mean, firstly is our transformation partnering officering, and this is really where we become an extension of an organization's change capacity. One of the really difficult unknowns going forward will be the level of resource an organization is going to need to deal with the reboot activity. The advantage of a transformation partner relationship is you don't have to worry about that so much, and we become that extension to your change capacity, and we worry about finding the people. So transformation partnering. Second would be reboot choreography, and this is really about how you coordinate the reboot, how you coordinate your resource management and get it all consistent and controlled. A classic part of our control promise, and something that we do for a whole range of organizations, whether in COVID reboot or any other form of reboot. And finally, I'd like to emphasize that point about Tiger teams. Tiger teams are really important concept, was hugely popular about 5-6 years ago in the portfolio world. Something that really is due a revisit. With 2 or 3 really committed, competent professionals, you can consistently reboot project after project. You're talking about a cost of 20, maybe 30k, and it'll save you £1 million in delay if you lose 30 days of delivery. So 3 ways that we'd love to help you, and do feel free to get in touch if you'd find that useful. So, as we always do in these things, let's finish off with our top 3 key principles for that recovery reboot. Firstly, do not waste the first 30 days by not having an executable plan. Start planning before you reboot, because actually, as we know, if you start to ramp projects up without a sensible plan, it is just going to go wrong. Bringing that forward party, identify the resource, plan, stagger, and iterate. Correctly pick those projects. Your strategy absolutely will have changed. It has to have changed. It's really important that you revise your projects and pick the projects that best support that new strategy. As we say here, get those designed, fail fast if you need to, but keep moving forward. This really is a once in a decade opportunity to redesign your portfolio and the direction you'll go in. And feel free to explore innovative approaches. Again, it's a really great time to try and do that. And finally, people. Re-engage with your teams in a thoughtful and targeted way. Make them productive quickly and help them to become productive quickly by picking the right resource and giving them the communication, the tools, and the coordination that they can start being productive from day one. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, this really is the single biggest transformation challenge that any organisation is going to face this decade, and it really will be the litmus test of our organisation's transformation, strength and resilience. You know, in 5 years' time, how an organisation deals with this will be how that organisation, how that transformation part of the organisation will be seen by the rest of the organisation. Utterly critical. And that's about our time, really. So thank you once again for joining us. We'll be back in a few weeks' time looking at financial crime and the transformational challenges of financial crime, and looking at the top 5 biggest pitfalls in delivering financial crime regulation implementation. Thanks once again for joining us, and have a wonderful bank holiday weekend.